Hello, it's Debra Jason with Creative Whispers of the Heart. And recently I had the good fortune to visit Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. That's where I spotted these awesome creatures. A mama moose and her hubby was nearby as well. They inspired me to come back home and paint what I'm calling Monte the Moose. This is an artificial intelligence image that I generated for reference, and then I put it over some graphite paper and sketched Monty onto some photo paper. Then I'm taking a brush, I believe it's a number 10 round brush, and putting masking fluid, this is Winsor & Newton masking fluid, filling in the outline of Monty. Just taking the brush and going over each area so that when I'm done, Monty will be filled with masking fluid. You'll see that as I'm doing that, his eye disappears when I put the masking fluid over that spot, but I'm not very worried about it. I'll go back in later and resketch his eye. A little tip when working with masking fluid, I forget where I heard this, but somebody pointed it out to me. Dip your brush in dish soap before you dip it in the masking fluid. You only have to dip it in the soap once, but it will make your brush much easier to clean, and it prevents the brush from getting all gloppy and gooey from the masking fluid. So I'm just continuing to fill in Monty's antlers there. And when I'm all done, you'll see that there's some bubbles and some ripples. I'm not very worried about that because I will eventually be removing the masking fluid. But here's what Monty looks like. Again, you can see he's kind of lumpy and bubbly, but I don't worry about it because all that's coming off eventually. I'm laying down some alcohol, 91%, and using shadow gray. This is from Pinata, and you can see, to me, it looks brown. So I want it to be very light, a very light background, so I'm just going across it with my brush. Not worried about going over Monty with the ink because he is covered in masking fluid. So I'm spreading that shadow gray across the paper. I just didn't want a stark white background. So the shadow gray serves the purpose, and now I'm adding some toward the bottom. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to add some water because Monty is standing in the water, sipping on the water, and I'm using sailboat blue. A little bit of alcohol on my brush, and then I put the sailboat blue right on the brush. And I go across the bottom of the painting, or what will be the painting, spreading that sailboat blue across. And I keep looking at my reference image. It's not an exact replica, but I'm going to try to come close to what it is. There I went to remove the masking fluid, and my camera decided not to record it. But you can see I took it off, and now I'm doing that outline of Monty's eye. And now I'm ready to paint Monty. I'm starting out with Sunshine Yellow and a very thin liner brush. This is, I believe, a number 2 brush. And you will see that I have the yellow ink in a palette. I have not added any alcohol. I'm just painting, looking at my reference image and filling in where I think there should be some yellow around his eye. And along his antlers. Just a thin line. Dipping it in my palette, and then I touch it on the paper towel just so that when I put it on the photo paper it doesn't totally bloom. I just want some thin lines here and there. going across each, I don't know what you call it, a spike of his antler? I guess I might have to look that up. Next, I'm taking limeade. There's a lot of color in the reference image that I generated. And so this is limeade. Again, you can see on the lower portion of this video, the reference image, which shows right now just his antlers. But there's some limeade in him. There's some pink, there's some green, there's some blue, and there's some limeade up there in his antlers. Oh, mistake, but I wiped it off with alcohol. Good thing. And I can go back now with some sailboat blue to what I was originally going to do before I dropped my brush on the photo paper. So I'm adding some touches of blue in his snout. Still using that very thin liner number 2 brush. A little bit on his lower lip, I guess you would call that. Not sure if it's his chin or not. And then there's water dripping from Monty's mouth. So I'm adding a little bit of blue around there. And next, there's some up by his ear, below his antler. And you can see this is very loose painting. I'm not trying to get any specific result, just getting some dabs of color down. Now I take some pitch black and I'm going to outline where he is standing in the water and start to create, again with that liner brush, excuse me, I was going to say pen, but I'm still using a brush, and go in there and create some of the ripples that are in the water. I am still not adding any alcohol here. I am just using the ink directly on the brush. And when I paint those ripples, I take a little bit more of the pitch black and I'm doing just some rough circles to make it look like ripples. These will change a little bit as you move forward in the video. You'll see how things progress. But taking that liner and brushing some of the pitch black to create ripples of water. It's coming along. This actually was a long process for me. I'm not used to painting animals per se. I usually do somewhat abstract painting. So this was a challenge, stepping out of my comfort zone, but it was a very fun challenge. Next, I'm going to his eye, and I don't want to fill the eye in totally. When I look at my reference image, there is a little white spot of his eye so that he's looking at someone or something while he's sipping water in the creek. And now I'm using the liner to just do a little bit of outlines around his antler there. And you can see I haven't added any ink recently, haven't added any alcohol. I'm just taking that brush with whatever ink is on it. It's pitch black ink, but I mean whatever ink is left on it from when I first dipped it in the pitch black. Now I'm filling in a bit of his antler because there is some dark area there if I look at my reference image. And you'll see that eventually I start to blend this in, but right now it's just pitch black ink. Here's how he's coming along so far, and here's a quick peek at the reference image so you can see where that green and limeade, and now I'm going with marigold. This is an alcohol ink marker. So I'm just filling in, looking at my reference image, where there might be some orange. In this case, the marker is called marigold, but you can see it's an orange color. And filling in different areas of his antler, or antlers, with the marigold. In some spots, there's just a little bit of that orange color, and in other spots, as you can see, it fills up a little bit more of his antler. Going up there to the tip and down, and a little bit below, I guess that's his ear. Filling more of that antler in, and now I'm taking a micro applicator brush because I want to blend the color a little bit. So there's a little bit of alcohol on this applicator, and you can see I just drip it onto the applicator. The little, I don't know if it's felt or foam at the tip of the applicator brush, but it helps to blend the ink that I put down with the alcohol ink marker. I just didn't want it to be stark lines, so I'm blending it. You can see how it makes the ink blossom and bloom a little bit through his antler. I didn't want it to bloom a whole lot. So now you can see I'm using quite a few different tools. This is a white Posca pen to get the little drips of water coming from Monte's mouth. And now I'm going to highlight some of those ripples in the water. Going around the black ripples. Always kind of taking a quick peek at my reference image. It makes me think of that song Ripple by the Grateful Dead. I'm a big fan of that band. Ripples on blue water is how the song goes. And so here's Monte creating ripples in the blue water in Grand Teton National Park. Well, actually on my photo paper. I'm taking another micro tip applicator brush with a little alcohol and using that to lift some of the ink. This photo paper doesn't go exactly back to white, but it will lift up some ink. You'll see that much later on when I actually wipe a large bit of it away further down on this video. In between, I tap the applicator on my paper towel so that there isn't a huge amount of alcohol on it. Now I'm using another alcohol ink marker. This one's Cool Gray. Because now I'm going to start working a little bit more on his fur. So I lay a bunch of that ink down, and then I take a Q-tip, pour some alcohol on the Q-tip, and now you can see I'm blending that. So it just doesn't look like stripes. It starts to blend in to create Monte's fur. Unfortunately, what happened here, since I did those lines, now it does look like a stripe, and I couldn't really get that to disappear on this photo paper. But you'll see as the video progresses how his fur progresses as well, so I'm not too worried about those lines. Now I'm going in, instead of just doing single lines, I'm doing a bunch of short strokes that then I will go back with the Q-tip, some alcohol, and blend that in. So I'm just going and creating his fur and trying to keep it all going in pretty much the same direction. See how he's coming along there. Then I decide to actually take my marker and put the color on the Q-tip, and then add alcohol on the Q-tip, and then spread it onto Monty's head. This was a little bit different technique, but that's the fun of alcohol inks, is exploring with different ways to apply it. So I'm putting some ink on the Q-tip, then alcohol on top of that, and then putting it down on Monty's head and blending it to create the fur around his face, around his snout, and his mouth. Now I'm going down below where his ear is and tapping very lightly. Not necessarily rubbing it, but tapping it. Down by his lip as well. On his snout. And I'm not too concerned about the other colors nearby because I want them to blend slightly. Now I'm just taking alcohol and I'm blending that pitch black that I put down earlier because I really didn't want it to be that black. I wanted it to sort of dull out to a gray, and you can see that's how I'm making it happen. Just a little bit of alcohol on the Q-tip and then directly going into that area that was pitch black, and now spreading it so it's more of a gray. Didn't add any more ink, didn't add any more color, just isopropyl on the Q-tip, and you can see how I can spread a lot of it without adding anything else. Going up to the tip of his antler and filling it in. I have a little palette off to the side, so I did put some alcohol over there and dipped my Q-tip in there with a little bit of color. Now, the reference photo had some pink in Monty's fur, so I went for pink sherbet. I am using a different brush now. Still a small tip on the brush, and adding in the pink sherbet to his fur. And then I decide it needs to be around his snout. I'm actually putting the ink directly on the brush at this point. But as I'm putting down the pink sherbet, I'm thinking this isn't quite bright enough. So you can see in my palette up above, I have some wild plum in there. So I put a little bit of alcohol in the palette, and I'm going back to his snout and adding wild plum to brighten it up there. Just short little strokes there. And then I decide to add some of that wild plum to the pink spot in his fur, just to brighten him up. He's going to be pretty bright, but the gray and the wild plum and the pink will all blend together to make his lovely fur. Now in my palette I have pitch black, but I actually added a little bit of amethyst because when I looked at the reference image, some of his coloring looked a little purple. This is coming out pretty dark, a little bit darker than what I might have expected, but I'm going to go with it for now. And you'll see I'm filling in areas around his lip, around his snout, just short little strokes. Adding some isopropyl alcohol on the brush to start to blend it a little bit there. And also adding the alcohol helps lighten the color a little bit. So now I'm just gonna spread that. I did not add any ink to my brush. Now I am adding ink to the brush right after I said I didn't. But I went ahead and I'm filling in some of that color around his nose. I think you can see some of the purple coming through now. Back with the applicator brush, because I find using this little micro applicator brush helps blend it without the color blooming too much. So I do want the color to bloom, but just a little bit, so that all the colors start to blend together, but without really overbearing one another. Back with a Q-tip, I just added some alcohol on the Q-tip, just to, again, do a little bit of blending. And blending that darker pitch black purple that I created and getting it to move across, I guess you would call this his snout, and trying to maintain the same direction as I go across the area. And as you can see, the more I go, the lighter it becomes, which is part of what I'm trying to achieve here. I go back down to that darker spot and start to blend it some more, because I thought it was just too dark down there by his lip. And as so far, I just have alcohol on that Q-tip and spreading the color that's already on the photo paper. So here's how he is coming along, Monte the Moose. A little bit of a close-up. I have taken a pen and created some of those lines, and now I'm back with my brush and filling in some areas, because he had some darker areas in his coat of fur, and then he had lots of lines in the reference image. So I'm filling in a lot of this area. Trying to create those sort of strands of fur that he has going across. But as I continue to do this, I don't know, I'm not 100% satisfied, but I keep going. As I said, this is taking me outside my comfort zone, and I'm just going and filling in the area with pitch black, using some of what's in that palette. Now there's more black in the palette than I had earlier with the purple in it. And I'm back to using this liner brush, this number 2 liner brush, as I fill in his fur by his chin. And I decide to go back with an alcohol ink marker. This is a black marker, by the way. And I'm filling in that area, creating a little bit of fur under his chin, just with some short little strokes. And then again, the microtip applicator brush to blend in the color without it blooming too much. You can see it's a really tiny tip on that applicator brush. And as I go along with the alcohol ink marker, I'm filling in some of the darker areas for Monty's fur. Going back and forth between the alcohol ink marker and the micro applicator brush. This just has alcohol on it, no ink on the micro tip applicator. Back to the alcohol ink marker. I left this portion of the video in to demonstrate how sometimes when we're painting, we're not always happy with what's happening. And I wasn't really digging what was happening here with the black, with the marker, with the microtip applicator. It didn't really feel like it was coming together the more that I looked at it. But I kept plugging away, trying to add more strokes of his fur and blending it with that microtip applicator brush, just adding alcohol to the applicator. So here's how he's looking. Now I went to, instead of a gray alcohol ink, instead of a black alcohol ink marker, I went with a gray one. Again, trying to create some of the strokes in his fur. When I look at the reference image, and while he is coming along, something still just isn't sitting quite right for me. So I encourage you to keep watching to see what I did to change things up. Because it's always good to know with alcohol ink markers that if something's going in a different direction than what you wanted, that most of the time there's a way to change it up. So I keep going through there, creating little strands of fur between the black and the gray markers. Going in with a Q-tip to blend. I really wanted a lot of this to be blended, not just look like lines of ink. So I'm blending it there with a Q-tip and some alcohol. And here's how Monty is coming along. But I'm not real happy with that, all that black. So I changed my mind and took a cotton swab, a cotton pad, poured alcohol on it, and wiped a lot of that away. So with this photo paper, it doesn't go quite back to white, but that was okay. I still wanted his fur to be kind of gray, but you can see I'm just taking alcohol and wiping it away. Just wasn't coming together in a way that was satisfying me. So now here's how he looks with all that wiped away. And now I'm going to go back in with a Q-tip and create some of his fur, just using the color that's on the paper there for now with the Q-tip and blending it, going all in the same direction. Still have some of that pink sherbet and that wild plum. Again, I'm still in there with a Q-tip, spreading in the color that's already on the paper, just using alcohol on the Q-tip. You can see the alcohol goes a long way, and I can go back to a spot that has some more saturated ink and spread that. Now I go back to the wild plum and decide to add some of that back into his fur using that liner brush. Really rough sketching it in basically with the brush. Taking another, and I've used several different micro tip applicator brushes. I don't use the same one because they have color on them. So this is a clean one that I just poured alcohol on, and I'm using it to spread the wild plum into Monty's fur. You can see it creates those lines because of the very fine tip on the applicator brush. More alcohol on there just to blend it and spread it. Now I'm back to a marker to create some of those little, I guess you'd call them strokes of fur, lines of fur, because there are lots of lines in his fur, around his fur. There it is a little bit closer. And I'm using a fine tip, ultra fine tip Sharpie now. Just a black Sharpie. And going across and adding those lines, which also adds some texture to his fur. I feel like that Q-tip did create a lot of texture on its own, just blending it. But I'm going through, looking at my reference image and adding some strokes with the ultra fine tip Sharpie. I hope you're enjoying this video. I know it can be long, but I really wanted you to see the process of what I did from start to finish, because Monty is quite a different approach for me. I usually use a lot of blowing tools, but now I'm using brushes and I'm adding, I already had some orange in my palette. I think it's sunset orange, but I'm going in now and filling in Monty's antlers with that sunset orange. And all the colors in his antlers will blend together eventually. Right now I'm not worried about the orange blending in with the gray, because that's how it's supposed to be. Adding some alcohol to my brush and then going back to the palette where I have that orange and filling in his antlers. See? He's coming along. That antler pretty much had mostly orange, so just dipping it in the palette. Didn't add any alcohol there, just going back to the palette and taking the orange and filling in his antler. It's fun to do something new and different, and Monty is very new and different for me. So I'm enjoying the process, and I hope you are too, and that you'll give the process a try. Now, cranberry is the color that's going on top of the orange, because Monty's antlers were pretty colorful. And as I said earlier, all the colors in his antlers kind of blend together. The yellow, the orange, the gray, and now cranberry. colors in his antlers remind me of a sunset. The orange, yellow, cranberry. I love sunsets. Most people do, I think. So just filling in those antlers and blending. There's some alcohol on the brush so you can see the color is blooming. Adding just a little bit there. And some by his ear. Now I'm taking some alcohol and just getting the colors to bloom and blend a little bit more. I did not add any more cranberry to the brush. I just added some alcohol. Now I'm back to an ultra fine point Sharpie. This is a gray one. It's kind of a charcoal gray, and I'm outlining his antler, and in some cases filling in the gray, as you can see right there, using the Sharpie. Sharpies, by the way, are alcohol-based. So if I were to add alcohol to this, the color would bloom and blend, as you saw earlier, in other parts of Monty's face. So just moving along with the ultra fine tip. And as I look at my reference photo, there are some lines of gray that go through Monty's antlers, see? So now I'm going through and outlining, but also filling in some of those lines that are in his antlers, I guess you'd call them. I'm not sure, it's a rack. A rack like they have on elk. I guess moose have a rack of antlers. Adding those lines throughout his antlers. I'm using a slightly thicker alcohol ink marker now instead of the ultra fine tip Sharpie, so that the lines in his antlers are a little bit more prominent and visible. And adding some color in some spots throughout the antlers, not just adding a line. And now I flip Monty with an ultra fine point black Sharpie. I flipped him so that it was a little easier for me to outline his antlers. But I'm going across, and this way it draws a little bit more attention and definition to his antlers by going over the edges with the black ultra fine tip Sharpie. And I do this not just with his antlers, I do this throughout his body, or what you can see of his upper body as he's standing in the creek, to give him some clear definition. There you can see Monty's coming along nicely, I think. And of course, what would be my painting without some splatters? I added some sailboat blue splatters, and here you can see I added some lines to his antlers, and there he is framed. So if you like this video, I hope you'll give it a try. Please comment below or share it with those you know. Thanks a million for watching.